Take it, erase it, and disappear from my son's life forever.
Evelyn's voice cut through the room like a blade. Take it. She shoved the check across the marble table. $20,000, its edges brushing against the trembling hands of the maid. The girl stood there, visibly pregnant, her eyes red, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. Evelyn didn't soften. Remove that thing, she barked. Erase it, and disappear from my son's life forever. The room was silent, except for the maid's quiet sob. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice cold and final. You were never meant to be part of this family. Take the money, or I will make sure you regret staying. The maid stared at the check. Then slowly, she reached for it. But what Evelyn didn't know was that this decision would come back to destroy everything she spent her life protecting. If you love emotional, powerful stories about secrets, family, and karma, subscribe now. Like this video to support the channel. And comment below, was Evelyn right to do this? Or did she cross an unforgivable line? Now, let me tell you how this story truly begins. Evelyn Blackwood did not become powerful by accident. Power was something she fought for with her bare hands, her sleepless nights, and a heart she slowly trained not to feel. People who knew her story said she was strong. People who worked for her said she was cold. People who crossed her said nothing at all, because they never got the chance twice. She owned companies that fed thousands, banks that decided who rose and who fell, properties that touched the sky. But none of that impressed her. To Evelyn, wealth was not luxury. It was armor. She often said, without shame, money is the only thing that does not betray you. And she meant it. Evelyn grew up with nothing. No inheritance. No safety net. Just hunger, dust, and a mother who whispered prayers that never seemed to be answered. As a child, Evelyn learned early that crying changed nothing. Begging only made people look down on you. Depending on love was a gamble poor people lost every day. One night, when she was still young, she heard her mother say to a neighbor, "If only I had money, my children wouldn't suffer like this." That sentence burned itself into Evelyn's bones. From that day, she decided, I will never be weak again. She worked while others slept. She endured insults without flinching. She swallowed humiliation and turned it into fuel. When people doubted her, she smiled and worked harder. When men laughed at her ideas, she memorized their faces and outgrew them. By 30, she owned her first major company. By 40, she controlled industries. By 50, her name alone could end careers or create them. But with every success, something inside her hardened. Someone once tried to congratulate her and said, "Evelyn, you must have sacrificed a lot." She replied calmly, "Sacrifice is better than poverty." Love never had a place in her plans. Love, in her experience, made people careless. It made them weak. It made them forgive things that should never be forgiven. When her husband died early, people expected tears. Evelyn dressed in black, stood straight, and returned to work 3 days later. When someone whispered, "Did you even love him?" she answered quietly, "I loved stability." Her only softness, if it could be called that, was her son, Leonard. Even then, she did not raise him with hugs and bedtime stories. She raised him with discipline and expectations. "Sit straight," she would say. "Speak clearly. Never embarrass this family." When Leonard cried as a boy, she wiped his tears and said, "Crying won't fix it. Thinking will." To Evelyn, scandal was worse than death. Death ended pain. Scandal lived forever. It stained names. It weakened power. It invited judgment. She warned Leonard often, "Do whatever you want in private, but never let the world see your mistakes." He once asked her, "Mother, what if I fall in love?" She looked at him for a long moment and said, "Then fall quietly." In Evelyn's world, reputation was everything. A clean name opened doors. A dirty one closed them forever. She had seen powerful people fall, not because they were poor or stupid, but because their secrets escaped them. So she controlled everything. Every detail. Every person. Every narrative. In her house, staff moved silently. They did not talk unless spoken to. They did not look her in the eyes unless necessary. Fear kept the mansion orderly. Money kept it loyal. She believed this was how life worked. Love was unpredictable. Money was dependable. Love made promises. Money kept them. So when Evelyn later sat across from a trembling maid, a check resting between them like a weapon, she did not see cruelty in her actions. She saw order. She saw herself fixing a problem the only way she knew how. Coldly, cleanly, permanently. Because Evelyn Blackwood had built her entire life on one belief, and it had never failed her before: everything has a price. And whatever has a price can be erased. Leonard Blackwood had everything most men prayed for, and nothing that truly held him together. He was young, handsome, and dangerously rich. The kind of man magazines loved to put on their covers. The kind of man women whispered about in rooms he had already left. His suits were tailored. His watches cost more than houses. His smile could open doors without effort. But behind all that shine, Leonard was empty in ways money could not fix. He grew up in luxury, but not in warmth. As a boy, he learned early that success pleased his mother more than affection. When he brought home trophies, Evelyn nodded with approval. When he brought home feelings, she dismissed them. Feelings are distractions, Leonard, she used to say. Men who feel too much lose control. So Leonard learned how to smile without meaning it, how to charm without connecting, how to touch without staying. By 32, he was already a billionaire, running the empire his mother built, expanding it globally. People called him brilliant. Evelyn called him adequate. One evening, after closing a massive deal, Leonard walked into his mother's study with a grin. "We just acquired 3 more companies," he said proudly. Evelyn didn't look up from her documents. "Good," she replied. "Don't let it make you careless." That was praise in her language. Leonard laughed it off, poured himself a drink, and leaned against the desk. "Do you ever enjoy anything?" he asked. Evelyn finally raised her eyes. "I enjoy winning," she said. "You should too." But winning never filled the quiet inside Leonard. He partied. He dated models. He traveled endlessly. Yet every night, when the noise faded, the silence came back louder. His mansion was filled with people during the day and loneliness at night. The Blackwood mansion was perfect. Polished floors, spotless windows, flowers replaced daily. Every corner smelled of money and control. Nothing was out of place. Nothing dared to be. Except one thing: the maid. Her name was Mara. Mara moved through the house like a shadow. She cleaned what others dirted, fixed what others ignored, and listened to conversations she was never meant to hear. She spoke softly, almost apologetically, as if her voice itself might offend. "Yes, sir." "No, ma'am." "I'm sorry." Those were the words she lived on. She woke before sunrise and slept after midnight. She washed Leonard's clothes without ever meeting his eyes. She wiped Evelyn's desk long after the woman had left the room. No one asked her how she felt. No one needed to. In that house, she was invisible. Sometimes, Leonard noticed her without meaning to. He would see her reflection in the glass as she cleaned behind him. He would hear her quiet humming when she thought she was alone. Once, he stopped and asked, almost surprised, "What's your name again?" She froze. "Mara, sir," she said softly. He nodded. "Right. Mara." And that was all. But loneliness has a way of blurring lines. Leonard began to stay up late, wandering the halls with a drink in hand. Mara was often still working then. Their conversations started small. Empty words filling empty spaces. "You work too hard," Leonard said one night. She smiled faintly. "Work keeps me busy, sir." "Busy from what?" She hesitated. "From thinking." He laughed, but the sound died quickly. There was something about her silence that felt safe. She didn't expect anything from him. She didn't judge him. She didn't want his name or his money. She just existed. And in a world where everyone wanted a piece of Leonard Blackwood, that felt dangerous. The mansion remained immaculate. Cold. Controlled. But beneath its shining floors and locked doors, something fragile was forming. Something unspoken, unequal, and doomed from the start. In a house where gold shined brighter than souls, one girl cleaned the floors and swallowed her tears. And no one noticed until it was too late. Leonard didn't plan it. That was the truth he would later tell himself, over and over, because it hurt less than admitting he let it happen. He came home drunk that night, the kind of drunk that wasn't loud or reckless, but heavy, the kind that sits in the chest, the kind that comes from swallowing disappointment all evening and washing it down with too many glasses of something burning. The house was quiet, too quiet. Mara was still awake. She was sitting in the living room, barefoot, wrapped in a thin sweater, the lamp casting a soft glow that made everything feel smaller, more intimate than it should have been. She looked up when he walked in, concern flashing across her face before she masked it. "You've been drinking," she said gently. Leonard shrugged out of his jacket, and dropped it on a chair. His words came slow, unguarded. He talked about the pressure, the failures, the anger he never knew where to put, about how tired he was of being strong, about how invisible he felt in his own life. Mara listened. That was how it started. She didn't interrupt him. She didn't judge. She sat closer, close enough for him to feel warmth where he'd felt empty all night. When he finally stopped talking, the silence between them felt charged, dangerous. "You're not a bad man, Leonard," she said softly. And in that moment, drunk, broken, desperate for comfort, he believed her in a way he hadn't believed anyone in a long time. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The kiss came slowly, hesitantly, like both of them were testing a line they knew they shouldn't cross. But once crossed, it was hard to see where it had been. They didn't speak after that. The night blurred, regret drowned in closeness, loneliness mistaken for connection. When morning came, it arrived without mercy. Leonard woke up sober, and the weight of what he'd done settled on his chest heavier than any hangover. Mara lay beside him, eyes open, already awake, already understanding that whatever had happened in the dark would not survive the light of day unchanged. Neither of them smiled. Because some mistakes aren't loud, some are quiet, and those are the ones that echo the longest. Mara understood. She was just the maid. She cleaned the marble floors until they shone. She washed clothes that cost more than her whole life. She cooked meals she never tasted. And when Leonard, Evelyn's son, walked past her, she lowered her eyes and stepped aside. That was the rule. Be invisible. But invisibility did not protect her from life. Under the loose uniform that hung awkwardly on her thin frame, Mara was hiding something heavy, something alive, something growing. She was pregnant. Every morning, she pressed her hand lightly against her stomach before getting out of bed, whispering words only she and God could hear. "Please, just let today pass." The uniform was 2 sizes too big now. She tied it tighter, layered it with a sweater even when the weather was hot. When the other workers complained about heat, Mara smiled and said nothing. One afternoon, in the kitchen, another maid frowned at her. "Mara, why are you dressing like an old woman? It's not cold." Mara forced a small smile. "I get cold easily," she replied. It was a lie, but it was safer than the truth. Some days, the nausea hit her suddenly. She would rush to the back of the house, kneel quietly, and breathe through it. She never made noise, never wanted attention. Pain had taught her to be quiet. At night, in her small room behind the mansion, Mara cried into her pillow. Not loud cries, just silent tears that soaked the fabric. Tears for the life growing inside her. Tears for the fear of what would happen if anyone found out. She knew how Evelyn looked at girls like her. "Poor girls don't think," Evelyn once said during breakfast, speaking to Leonard as if Mara wasn't standing right there pouring tea. They let emotions ruin their lives. Mara's hands had shaken that day. Now those words echoed in her head every time the baby kicked. Leonard had not spoken to her since that night. Not a word, not a look. When he passed her in the hallway, he walked faster. When their eyes almost met, he turned away. It hurt, but she expected it. Men like Leonard did not carry consequences in their bodies. Women like Mara did. One evening, Evelyn noticed something. She was sitting in the living room when Mara bent to pick up a fallen book. The movement was slow. Careful. Too careful. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "Mara," she said sharply. "Yes, Ma," Mara answered, her voice calm though her heart was racing. "Why are you moving like that?" "I'm fine, Ma. Just tired." Evelyn stood up and walked closer, her sharp eyes scanning Mara's body, the loose uniform, the way her hand unconsciously rested on her stomach. "You've been gaining weight," Evelyn said coldly. The room felt smaller. Mara swallowed. "I eat well, Ma." Evelyn said nothing more, but the silence was heavy. Dangerous. That night, Mara did not sleep. She sat on her bed, holding her stomach with both hands now, tears falling freely. "I don't have money," she whispered. "I don't have family. But I have you." The baby kicked again, as if answering her. And in that moment, Mara made a decision. No matter what happened, no matter who stood against her, no matter how powerful they were, she would protect her child, even if she had to disappear to do it, because she had been quiet all her life. But this time, her silence was carrying a truth too big to stay hidden forever.
Evelyn noticed the blood early that morning. The house was still quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made every small thing stand out. She was walking down the hallway when she saw Mara coming out of the guest room with a bundle of white bedsheets in her arms. Evelyn stopped. The white sheet was not fully folded. A dark red stain showed clearly in the middle. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Mara," she called. Mara froze. "Yes, yes, Ma," she answered, her voice shaking slightly. Evelyn pointed at the sheet. "What is that?" Mara looked down. Her heart began to beat fast. She knew she could not hide it anymore. "It's nothing, Ma," she said quickly. "I spilled something. Don't lie to me," Evelyn said sharply. "I have lived too long to be fooled by lies." She stepped closer and touched the stain with her finger. She looked at it for 1 second, then looked straight into Mara's face. "That is blood." Mara's hands started to shake. "I cut myself, Ma," she whispered. "It's small. I'm fine." Evelyn studied her closely. The pale face, the tired eyes, the oversized uniform, the way Mara stood like someone carrying a heavy secret. "You are lying," Evelyn said calmly. "Go and change your clothes. We are going to the hospital." Mara's eyes widened. "No, Ma, please," she begged. "I'm fine. I can work." "I did not ask if you can work," Evelyn interrupted. "I said we are going to the hospital." There was no arguing with Evelyn. On the way to the hospital, Mara sat in the back seat holding her stomach tightly. Tears ran silently down her face. Evelyn sat in front, quiet, her mind already racing. At the hospital, the doctor examined Mara gently. "Have you been feeling dizzy?" he asked. "Yes," Mara replied softly. "Any pain?" "Sometimes." Evelyn crossed her arms. "Doctor, stop asking small questions. Tell me what is wrong." The doctor looked at his notes, then looked up. "She is pregnant." The room went silent. "What?" Evelyn said slowly. "She is pregnant," the doctor repeated. "Several weeks along. The bleeding is from stress." Mara broke down completely. She covered her face and cried. Evelyn did not comfort her. She stood up slowly, her face hard. "Who did this?" she asked. Mara could not speak. Evelyn turned and walked out of the room. She took out her phone and dialed number. "Leonard," she said when he answered. "Come to the hospital now." Leonard arrived 30 minutes later. He looked annoyed, not worried. His suit was neat. His face calm. "What is this about, Mother?" he asked. "I have an important meeting." Evelyn slapped him. The sound was loud. "You got the maid pregnant," she said. "Explain yourself." Leonard looked at Mara. Then he looked back at his mother. He sighed. "It just happened," he said casually. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. "That's it? That's all you have to say?" Leonard shrugged. "I was drunk. She was around. It happened." Mara cried harder. "You have no shame," Evelyn said, her voice low. "It's not a big deal," Leonard replied. "We can fix it." "Fix it how?" Evelyn asked. Leonard leaned back in his chair. "Give her money. Make her remove it. Send her away." Mara lifted her head slowly. "No," she whispered. "Please." Leonard didn't look at her. Evelyn closed her eyes. In that moment, she realized the truth was worse than the blood on the sheet. Her son felt nothing. And the quiet maid she barely noticed was carrying a secret that would destroy everything. And from that day, the house was never the same again.
Evelyn did not sleep that night. She sat alone in her bedroom, the lights off, the city glowing through the tall windows. The house was quiet, but her mind was loud. Too loud. The doctor's words kept repeating in her head. She is pregnant. But Evelyn's fear was not the child. It was scandal. By morning, her thoughts were already arranged like numbers on a page. She thought of headlines. Billionaire's son impregnates maid. Empire built on lies. Moral failure at the top. She imagined shareholders panicking. Board members calling emergency meetings. Investors pulling out. Years of hard work reduced to gossip. She whispered to herself, "This cannot come out." Leonard was sleeping peacefully in his room. That angered her more. She remembered how long it took to build her name. How she fought men twice her size in boardrooms. How she swallowed insults and smiled while planning revenge. And now a poor maid and one careless night threatened everything. No, she would not allow it. At breakfast, Evelyn watched Mara silently as the girl poured tea with trembling hands. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her shoulders bent like someone carrying a heavy load. Evelyn felt nothing. "Mara," she said calmly. "Yes, Ma," Mara answered, her voice small. "After lunch, come to my study." Mara froze. "Yes, Ma," she whispered. The hours dragged for Mara. Every second felt like a punishment. She cleaned slowly, her heart beating fast. She already knew what was coming. When she entered Evelyn's study, the door closed softly behind her. "Sit," Evelyn said. Mara sat. Evelyn remained standing, her back straight, her face cold. "You know why you are here," Evelyn said. Mara nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, Ma." Evelyn folded her arms. "You have put my family in danger." Mara shook her head quickly. "No, Ma. I didn't plan." "Silence," Evelyn said. "This is not about feelings." She walked to her desk and picked up a file. "My name is worth billions," Evelyn continued. "My son's name is worth more. One story like this can destroy everything." Mara's voice broke. "I'm sorry, Ma. I didn't want trouble." Evelyn looked at her sharply. "Sorry does not stop headlines." She sat down slowly. "You are poor," Evelyn said plainly. "You have nothing. No family. No protection." Mara flinched. "But I can change your life," Evelyn continued. "If you cooperate." Mara lifted her head slowly. "What do you mean, Ma?" Evelyn slid an envelope across the table. "There is enough money here for you to live comfortably," she said. "You will leave this house. Leave this country. Start fresh." Mara's hands shook as she touched the envelope. "And the baby?" Mara asked softly. Evelyn's eyes hardened. "There will be no baby," she said. The words hit Mara like a slap. "No," Mara whispered. "Please, it's a life." Evelyn leaned forward. "It is a mistake," she said. "Mistakes are erased." Tears streamed down Mara's face. "You will remove it quietly," Evelyn continued. "You will sign documents. You will disappear." Mara cried openly now. "I'll do anything else," she begged. "I'll leave without money. Just let me keep my child." Evelyn stood up. "You are not in a position to negotiate," she said coldly. "This is not about you. It is about protecting what I built." She paused, then added, "If you refuse, you will leave with nothing. No job. No support. No protection." Mara held her stomach. The room was silent except for her sobbing. Evelyn turned away. "Think carefully," she said. "This is your only chance." When Mara left the room, she felt empty. Evelyn remained behind, staring at the city. She did not feel like a villain. She felt like a woman doing what must be done. But she did not know yet that some truths cannot be buried, and some children are not meant to be erased. The study was silent. Mara stood at the doorway, hands folded nervously in front of her. Evelyn sat behind her massive mahogany desk, her posture straight, her face as cold and sharp as the marble floors of the house. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, casting long lines across the room. There was no warmth in the air, only authority. "Sit," Evelyn said, her voice calm, almost gentle, but there was no room for refusal. Mara obeyed immediately, lowering herself into the chair across from the desk. Her fingers twisted together in her lap. Her eyes darted nervously to the papers, the pen, the leather-bound ledgers, anything that might give her a clue about what was coming. Evelyn studied her quietly for a long moment. Then she leaned forward, resting her hands on the desk. "You are here because of a mistake," she began. "A mistake that could destroy my family, my company, everything I have built." Mara swallowed. Her throat felt tight. "I know," she whispered. "No," Evelyn said sharply. "You do not know. You are poor. You have no power. You are a housemaid. But you are carrying something that could ruin us." She paused. "You understand that, don't you?" "Yes, Ma," Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. She placed it in front of Mara. The weight of it felt heavy, though it was just paper. "This," Evelyn said, tapping the envelope, "is more money than you have ever held in your life. Enough to change everything. Enough to live comfortably, to start fresh, to never worry about hunger or rent again." Mara looked at it, wide-eyed, but didn't touch it. Evelyn continued, her voice steady, unshakable. "But there is a condition. You will leave this house. You will leave this country. You will never return. You will remove this mistake. And when you are gone, you will never speak of it. Not to anyone. Ever." Mara's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. "You want me to what?" she asked quietly. You want me to get rid of my baby? Evelyn's eyes were sharp, unyielding. Yes, she said simply. That is what must happen. You will take care of it quietly. No one will know. No one must know. You will disappear, and life will go on as if nothing happened. Mara's chest tightened. Her stomach ached, not from the baby, but from the weight of Evelyn's words. No shouting. Evelyn continued, her tone unchanging. No threats. No anger. Just a choice. A chance. This is the only way to protect yourself and everyone involved. Take the money. Leave. Start over. Mara looked at the envelope again. She saw her whole life in that paper. Comfort, safety, freedom. But at what cost? She lowered her gaze to her hands, resting on her stomach, feeling the small life growing there. Evelyn's voice softened, just slightly, enough to make Mara flinch. You are a smart girl, she said. You know this is the safest option. You can take the money, disappear, and no one will ever harm you again. Mara shook her head, tears threatening to fall. I can't, she whispered. I can't do that. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. Her expression did not change, though her eyes were sharp and calculating. Then you will leave with nothing, she said. No help. No protection. Nothing. You will have only yourself. And I can promise you, that is not enough to survive in this world. Mara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She thought of the baby, of Leonard's careless words, of Evelyn's cold authority. She thought of the life she could have with the envelope, and the life she could never have if she obeyed her conscience. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Evelyn did not move. She did not speak. She simply waited. Finally, Mara opened her eyes, her voice trembling. I need time, she said. Evelyn nodded once, sharply. You have until tonight, she said. After that, the offer stands no more. Think carefully, girl. This is your only chance. Mara stood slowly, bowing her head slightly, her hands still clasped over her stomach. She left the room without another word, the envelope heavy on the desk, like a life that had already been decided for her. Evelyn watched her go, eyes cold, heart steady. In her mind, it was simple. This was not cruelty. This was survival. Reputation was everything. And some mistakes, no matter how small, could not be allowed to exist. But deep inside, a tiny voice whispered, a warning she refused to hear. Some lives cannot be erased. Mara sat in Evelyn's study, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The envelope of money sat on the desk between them, heavy and silent. Evelyn's eyes watched her like a hawk. Leonard lounged lazily in the corner, indifferent, checking his phone. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Mara listened silently. Every word Evelyn had said earlier echoed in her mind. Take the money. Leave. Never return. Erase the mistake. She thought of hunger, of nights spent with an empty stomach, rubbing it, and praying the baby inside would be okay. She thought of homelessness, of living in tiny rooms with broken windows, of people like her who were invisible to the world. She thought of shame, the kind that burns in your chest when no one would care if you disappeared. And then she felt the baby kick. Strong, steady, alive. Her fingers pressed gently against her stomach. 4 little lives, moving and alive. She whispered softly to herself, I can't lose you. Her mind raced. What could she do? How could she protect them? She looked at Evelyn, cold and commanding, and at Leonard, so careless, so unbothered. Finally, she asked the question that had been burning inside her all day. Her voice was quiet, trembling, but steady enough to break through the tension in the room. If they were born rich, would they still be a mistake? Evelyn's face remained unreadable. Leonard smirked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. Mara thought of the lives they could have. The safety, the food, the home. She thought of what it meant to survive in a world where no one would notice you if you fell. She thought of the babies, kicking, alive, innocent, and she made her choice. She reached out and picked up the pen. Her hand shook as she signed the documents Evelyn had prepared. Evelyn watched her silently. When Mara finished, she gently set the pen down. Evelyn felt relief flood through her chest. Finally, the problem was solved. Mara folded the papers carefully and set them aside. She accepted the envelope of money, sliding it close to her chest for a brief moment. She did not smile. She did not cry. She only nodded. Evelyn stood, straightening her blouse. That's all, she said calmly. You know what you must do? Leave before tomorrow morning. Mara looked up at her. I understand, she said quietly. Leonard glanced at her briefly, then turned back to his phone. He would forget her name by tonight. She would be just another shadow leaving the house. A problem solved, a mistake erased. Mara tucked the envelope under her arm. She took a deep breath. She walked out of the room, silently, without looking back. Evelyn exhaled slowly, feeling the weight lift off her shoulders. The empire was safe. Her son's reputation untouched. The scandal avoided. But as Mara disappeared from sight, Evelyn did not see the quiet strength in her back, the determination in her eyes. The small lives inside her waiting for a mother who had just been forced to sell them, in a way. And Leonard, he would never remember her. The mansion was quiet that night. The chandeliers were dimmed, and the echo of footsteps had long since disappeared. Mara moved through the halls carefully, each step measured, each breath shallow. She carried only a small bag, her most precious belongings and the envelope Evelyn had given her. She didn't look back. Not once. In the study, Evelyn sat behind her desk, pretending to read, though she had already checked the clock several times. She sensed Mara had gone, but she did not move to stop her. She trusted that the girl knew her place, and that the problem was about to be solved. Mara paused briefly outside Evelyn's study. Her hand rested on the doorframe. For a second, she considered speaking, saying goodbye, thanking her for something, but the words never came. She couldn't trust herself to speak without crying, without shaking, and she knew Evelyn would not have cared. She whispered softly to herself, a promise only she could hear. I will survive. I will keep them safe. She crept past Leonard's room. He was asleep, sprawled across the bed in his expensive sheets, phone lying forgotten on the floor beside him. He would never wake to see her leave. He would never notice she was gone. The hallways smelled of polished wood, perfume, and power. Mara breathed deeply, letting it fill her lungs one last time. This house had given her nothing but work and fear, but it had also taught her strength. The kitchen was empty. The staff had gone to bed hours ago. Mara moved quietly, careful not to wake anyone. She stepped outside into the cold night air. The world beyond the mansion was dark, quiet, and free. The stars were bright above her, as if encouraging her onward. She paused for a moment, pressed her hands over her stomach, and whispered, "You are alive. You are mine. No one can take you from me." And then she walked forward, each step taking her farther from the life she had known and closer to the life she was about to build. Evelyn, back in the study, finally looked up from her desk. The envelope of money sat neatly on the polished surface. She exhaled slowly, a small, cold smile on her face. Finally, she said quietly, "It's over. The problem is gone." Leonard was still asleep upstairs. His mother's calm assurance was all he needed. In his mind, Mara had vanished like a shadow. No goodbye, no trace. The scandal was buried, the mistake erased. And yet, in the silence of the night, Mara's absence felt heavier than anyone in the mansion could imagine. She carried with her a secret life, a spark of strength, and hope for the children she protected. A life Evelyn and Leonard believed they had controlled, but could never touch. By morning, the mansion buzzed as usual. Breakfast was served. Work continued. Evelyn nodded at Leonard. "It's done," she said. And in her mind, she believed it. The problem had been solved. The girl was gone. Forever. But Mara's journey had just begun, and nothing in that mansion could erase the life she carried within her. Years passed. The mansion remained grand, but its heart had grown cold. The empire Evelyn had built continued to grow. New buildings, new companies, new deals. The numbers on spreadsheets climbed higher and higher. Investors praised the family name. Shareholders celebrated. The world outside had no idea of the secret that had once lived inside those walls. Inside, however, life had shifted in ways Evelyn could never erase. Evelyn herself had aged. Her hair, once dark and glossy, now carried streaks of silver. Her hands, still steady, showed tiny lines of time and stress. The sharpness in her eyes remained, but there was a quiet exhaustion behind them, a weight she could not admit. She walked the halls with purpose, her authority unchallenged, but her heart carried the memory of what had happened. What she had forced Mara to do. Leonard changed too. Over the years, he became colder, crueler. He spoke less, and when he did, his words cut. He made decisions without asking questions. He cared little for the people who worked for him, the employees who had families, or even for Evelyn herself. He became a shadow of the man she had raised. Successful, yes, but heartless. One evening, Evelyn watched him from her study window as he left for a business meeting. His face was tense, his jaw tight. He didn't wave. He didn't look back. She sighed, sitting down heavily in her chair. Leonard has changed, she whispered to herself. Or maybe he has always been this way, and I just refused to see it. Dinner in the mansion was quiet. There were no grandchildren running through the halls, no laughter from young voices. The rooms were filled with wealth. Yes, crystal chandeliers, polished marble, gold accents, but there was no warmth. Only the echo of power and money. Mother, Leonard said suddenly, sitting down at the long dining table, his tone clipped. The board meeting was finished. No delays. We made the decisions we needed. Evelyn looked at him, her face calm, but inside a storm brewed. And, she asked, did anyone question you? No one dared, Leonard replied casually. They know better. Evelyn nodded slowly. Her thoughts drifted to Mara. She had left years ago, disappeared quietly into a life Evelyn had never known. Evelyn had assumed the problem was solved. She had told herself Mara and the child were gone forever. And yet, there was a hollow feeling inside her, a nagging sense that something had been lost, something she could not control. Sometimes, Evelyn said softly, more to herself than to Leonard, the consequences of your actions follow you, no matter how much money you have, no matter how carefully you hide them. Leonard didn't answer. He never did. He pushed his plate away and walked toward the staircase. Evelyn watched him go. She thought of what could have been. A family, love, joy in the halls of the mansion, grandchildren laughing, a life richer than money alone could buy. But that life had never come. Leonard had no warmth to give. She had built a world of steel, but her heart had remained empty. She sat in the dining room long after Leonard had left. The walls reflected the flickering candlelight, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt the weight of guilt pressing down on her chest. She had protected the empire, yes, but at what cost? The empire grew. Leonard grew colder. Evelyn aged. And the quiet, hidden truth of Mara and her child, gone from their lives, haunted the mansion like a shadow that refused to leave. The house had everything, except the one thing that mattered most. Family. Evelyn lay in her bed, the night heavy around her. The mansion was silent, but sleep would not come easily. She closed her eyes, but the darkness behind her eyelids was not empty. It was alive. She dreamed. In the dream, she walked through the grand halls of the mansion, but the walls were smaller, darker. Shadows stretched long across the marble floors. She heard it first, soft, muffled crying. Then it grew louder, urgent, impossible to ignore. She turned, and in the dim light, she saw them, for small shadows huddled together. Quadruplets, tiny shapes with fragile, trembling hands and feet. Their cries pierced the air, echoing down corridors that had once been silent, polished, and orderly. Evelyn reached out, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Who? Who are you?" The shadows did not answer. They cried harder. Their tiny hands reached for her, for warmth, for protection. And Evelyn felt something unfamiliar, a sting in her chest, a pang she had not allowed herself to feel in decades. She woke with a start, sweat on her brow, her heart racing. She pressed her hands against her chest. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself. "Just a dream. Weakness. Imagining what does not exist." But the crying lingered in her mind, faintly, like a memory refusing to fade. She dismissed it, turning her back to the window, trying to recapture the control that had always defined her life. The next day, in the boardroom, her mind was elsewhere. Leonard strode in, confident and cold as ever, discussing mergers and acquisitions. Evelyn listened, nodding, her face calm. But her thoughts kept returning to the shadows in her dream. Quadruplets. Crying. A life she thought she had erased. That evening, a knock came at the door. A journalist. Young, determined, polite but persistent. "Mrs. Evelyn Hale?" he asked. "I have some questions about your son, about Leonard's past." "There are rumors." Evelyn's hands rested on the polished desk. She looked at him calmly, measured, the way she always did when controlling a situation. "Rumors?" she repeated, her voice soft but firm. "I don't deal in rumors. I'm only asking." The journalist began. She raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I will make this simple. Here's a check. Enough for you to forget whatever it is you think you know. Forget my family. Forget my son. Forget me. The journalist blinked, hesitated, then took the envelope. He left without another word. Evelyn watched him go. She felt a rush of satisfaction. Control restored. Reputation intact. Problem solved. But the seed of truth is restless. Even as she returned to her empty dining room, her empire expanding, her son achieving more power than anyone could measure, that faint echo lingered. The crying in her dreams. Shadows she could not name. And somewhere far from her gaze, the girl she had forced away was living, breathing, growing strong. And the children she had tried to erase were alive. Evelyn told herself it was nothing. But deep inside, in the quietest corners of her heart, she knew. Some truths cannot be buried, no matter how much money is spent, no matter how carefully a name is erased. It was a bright, calm morning. The sun reflected off the marble gates of the Hale estate, glinting like a warning. Evelyn was in her study, reviewing company reports, when the housekeeper knocked softly at the door. "Madam, someone is at the gates. She says she's here to see you," the housekeeper said. Evelyn frowned. "Describe her," she demanded, her voice sharp. She's confident, ma. Elegant. Not like anyone we usually see." Evelyn's brow furrowed. Confident. Elegant. Powerful. That combination of words immediately made her uneasy. She had not felt this stir in years. "Send her in," Evelyn said, trying to steady her voice. The front door opened, and there she was. Mara. Or rather, Mara no longer. The girl who had once been quiet, trembling, and invisible. She walked through the doorway with a calm strength that filled the room. Every step measured, every movement composed. She wore a tailored suit, her hair sleek, her eyes sharp and steady. There was a power in her that made the air shift. Evelyn froze. It took her a moment, longer than she expected, to recognize the maid she had once dismissed. The girl who had left quietly years ago, carrying nothing but hope and fear. And now she was here, fully grown, confident, commanding. "Mara." Evelyn's voice was soft, but it carried a tremor she tried to hide. "I go by Elena now," Mara said calmly, her voice smooth and steady, like a river that had found its course. "But yes, I am the same person you once knew." Evelyn stood slowly, her hands gripping the desk. Her heart raced, though her face remained composed. I didn't expect," she began, but words failed her. Elena, or Mara, smiled faintly, a smile that was both kind and unyielding. "I didn't expect to return either," she said. "But some things cannot be left unresolved forever." Leonard entered the room then, yawning, unaware of the tension in the air. "Mother, who?" He stopped. His eyes widened as he looked at Elena. For the first time in years, he was caught off guard. He did not recognize her at first, her confidence, her elegance, the aura of authority she carried. Everything about her was unfamiliar. "Leonard," Evelyn said quietly, her own voice now firm. "This is someone you should meet." Elena's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "You don't know me yet," she said softly. "But soon you will." Leonard opened his mouth, then closed it. Words failed him, just as they had failed his mother for a moment. Evelyn's mind raced. The empire, the reputation, the money, the years of pretending the problem had disappeared. And now, in a calm, composed form, it had returned. A storm she had never seen coming. "I see you've grown," Evelyn said finally, her voice controlled. But behind it was a tremor of something she could not name. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. Elena nodded slightly. "Yes, Ma, I have grown. And I have come back, for answers." The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. The walls of the mansion, once filled with power and wealth, seemed suddenly small, unable to contain the weight of what was about to unfold. Evelyn's mind raced. Money, influence, authority, everything she had relied on to control the world, felt suddenly insufficient. And Leonard, standing stiffly beside her, realized for the first time that the girl he had forgotten, the girl he had once wronged, was no longer someone he could ignore. Elena, or Mara, smiled faintly again, calm, elegant, unyielding. And in that moment, Evelyn knew, the quiet maid she had once dismissed was no longer quiet. And the life she had tried to erase had returned, stronger, bolder, and unstoppable. The Hale mansion had always been a place of power. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, polished surfaces that reflected wealth in every corner. But today, It felt different. The front gates opened slowly. A sleek black car rolled in. The driver nodded once and parked perfectly. Out stepped Mara. No longer a timid, quiet maid. No longer a girl who hid under oversized uniforms. She walked with confidence. Every step measured, every movement controlled. Her tailored suit hugged her frame perfectly. Her hair was neat, her eyes sharp and alert. She carried herself with the authority of someone who had built a life from nothing and conquered it. And she was not alone. For boys followed her. Identical, tall for their age, their movements precise, their gazes calm but intelligent. They did not fidget. They did not smile at the opulence around them. They did not look to Evelyn or Leonard for approval. They were not impressed by wealth. Evelyn, seated in the study, felt her chest tighten. The air seemed to shift. She watched as the figure she had once dismissed as nothing, once tried to erase, walked into her life again, and now she carried a presence that filled every corner of the mansion. Mara, Evelyn whispered, disbelief cracking her voice. I am still Mara, she replied calmly. But I am no longer the girl you knew. Evelyn stood slowly, hands gripping the desk. Her heart raced, though her face remained composed. I didn't expect. You didn't expect me to return, Mara said, her voice smooth, controlled. She didn't wait for forgiveness, didn't ask for sympathy. She only stood, tall and calm, with her 4 sons behind her, their small but sharp faces mirroring her strength. Leonard appeared then, yawning, as if he had just been pulled out of an ordinary day. He froze. His eyes widened. For the first time in years, someone in this house had caught him off guard. You, Leonard started, voice low, uncertain. Mara's gaze met his without flinching. You don't know me yet, she said softly. But soon, you will understand. The quadruplets stood perfectly still behind her. They did not smile. They did not ask for money. They did not fidget. Evelyn could feel their presence like a quiet force in the room, as if they were the living proof of a life that had been wronged but survived. You built this empire, Mara said, finally addressing Evelyn. Her tone was calm, but every word carried weight. But I built something too. From nothing. No handouts. No shortcuts. Every step I took for my children. For them. For me. Evelyn opened her mouth, but no words came. She had ruled the world with money, power, and control. But here was proof that strength could grow from pain, from absence, from a life they had tried to erase. Leonard shifted, uncomfortable under her gaze. Mother, this isn't what I expected, he muttered. Mara shook her head slightly. You expected fear. You expected begging. You expected weakness. But you got truth. And my children got life. They don't care about money. They don't need your approval. They only want answers. The quadruplets remained silent, intelligent eyes observing everything, reading the mansion, the people, the legacy they had been born into, but refusing to be impressed by it. Evelyn felt a shiver run through her. She had controlled everything. Money, reputation, Leonard, but she had not controlled this. She had not controlled the life she tried to erase, the girl she tried to bury, or the children she believed she could silence. Mara smiled faintly, not cruelly, not kindly, just assuredly. I am no longer a maid, she said softly. I am someone you cannot ignore. And neither are they. She gestured to the quadruplets. They are my life. My children. And you will not erase that again. The room was quiet. The chandeliers glinted in the sunlight, but even their brilliance could not compete with the presence of a woman reborn, and the life she had created from nothing. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, realizing that for the first time in decades, she was powerless. And Leonard forgot the name Mara had once been. All he could see was the woman standing before him, and the 4 boys who would never bow to his wealth, or his indifference, or his cruelty. Evelyn sat behind the desk, her hands folded neatly, trying to maintain composure. Leonard leaned against the side wall, arms crossed, looking at Mara and the boys with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Mara's voice cut through the silence, calm and steady. They don't want inheritance, she said. They don't want money. They don't want your approval. They want answers. They want to know why they were almost erased. Why their lives, my life, was treated as if it could be bought and thrown away. The quadruplets looked up at Leonard. For reflections of him seemed to stare back at him. For young boys, strong and intelligent, innocent yet questioning, silently asking for the truth. Leonard's face changed slightly. For a moment, his usual cold arrogance wavered. His jaw tightened, his fingers clenching at his sides. He had never imagined seeing 4 children who were his own, but not just his. They carried the spirit, the resilience, of the woman he had taken for granted. Mara took a small step forward. "You don't know us," she said softly, "but you created us. You cannot deny that. And yet, for years, you forgot. You pretended we didn't exist." Leonard shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know. I mean, I was young. I made mistakes. Mara repeated, her voice steady, almost cutting. 4 lives were almost erased because of your carelessness, because of your selfishness. And now, you are finally seeing them. Seeing the truth. Leonard swallowed hard. The quadruplets remained silent. Their eyes did not leave him. He could feel their presence like a mirror held up to his soul, reflecting the choices he had made, the consequences he had ignored. I can give them anything, Leonard said finally, his voice shaking slightly. Money, schools, trust funds, everything they could want. I'll make sure they never lack anything. Mara shook her head gently. They don't want anything you can buy, she said. They want honesty. They want to know why their mother, why I, was forced to leave. Why we were almost made invisible. Why you pretended none of us existed. Evelyn shifted in her seat. Her face remained composed, but inside, a cold knot of fear and guilt had formed. For years, she had believed the problem buried, the scandal gone. But Mara's words were a tidal wave crashing through the carefully built walls of wealth and control. Leonard's gaze faltered. He looked at the 4 boys again, all identical, all intelligent, all silent. The reflection of himself multiplied 4 times over. And for the first time, he realized that money, authority, and status could not fix the consequences of his actions. Mara took another step forward, placing her hand lightly on her chest, her eyes unwavering. They are alive because of me, she said softly, but with quiet power. They are here because I protected them. And now, you will answer. Not with money, not with power, but with truth. The room fell silent. The quadruplets stood like statues, observing, waiting, holding the weight of a life that had been nearly stolen from them. Evelyn's face was pale but controlled. Leonard's face, however, betrayed the first crack in his armor. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. He swallowed, his hands trembling slightly. I will tell the truth, he said, though even he did not fully believe it. Mara nodded once, quietly. Good. That is the first step, because the rest cannot be bought. And in that quiet, tense moment, the mansion felt smaller, weaker. Wealth and power meant nothing here. Only truth and life remained. The study was heavy with tension. Mara stood at the center, her 4 sons flanking her, their small but intelligent faces staring at Leonard and Evelyn. The chandeliers above cast sharp reflections on the polished floor, but the real power in the room was not wealth. It was truth. One of the boys, the eldest, stepped slightly forward. His voice was steady, calm, but carried the weight of a question that pierced the air like a knife. If you bought our silence before we were born, he said, looking directly at Leonard, why do you think we want your money now? The room went silent. Leonard's face paled. Evelyn's hands gripped the edge of the desk. For years, they had relied on money and influence to erase Mara's presence, to bury the consequences of Leonard's carelessness. And now, this small voice, a boy's voice, cut through everything. Mara took a slow breath, her eyes never leaving Leonard's. Her voice was calm, steady, full of the quiet power she had built over years. I never aborted your father's children, she said softly. I never gave in to the plan Evelyn made me take. I didn't erase the lives he created. I protected them. I carried them in my womb alone. I carried 4 lives, and I fed them before I fed myself. I slept hungry so they could eat. I worked, studied, and built a life from nothing, so they could grow strong, safe, and unafraid. She paused, letting her words settle, heavy and unyielding in the air. I used the money Evelyn gave me not to erase life, she continued. I used it to escape, to study, to build something that could not be bought, to protect my children from the cruelty, the carelessness, and the lies that you both thought could destroy us. Evelyn's face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the desk. Mara, I thought, she stammered. Mara shook her head slightly. You thought money could erase us. You thought a name, a reputation, a deal could erase 4 lives. But you cannot erase life. You cannot erase love. You cannot erase truth. Leonard's voice was low, shaky. I didn't know. You didn't know because you refused to care, Mara said firmly. You left it to Evelyn to handle, to make us disappear, to pretend we never existed. But we did exist. And we are here, strong, alive. And nothing you offer now can undo the years of absence, the fear, the hunger, or the loneliness we survived. The eldest boy, his eyes steady, spoke again. We don't want your money. We want the truth. We want answers. And we want to know why we were almost erased. Mara's gaze softened, just slightly, at her son's words. Exactly. You deserve to know. You deserve to understand. Not because of wealth. Not because of inheritance. But because of life. Because of love. Because of honesty that was denied to us for far too long. Leonard looked down, shame and fear flickering across his face. For the first time, he realized the empire he had inherited, the control he wielded. It meant nothing here. For children, alive, intelligent, and unafraid, could not be bought, could not be silenced, could not be erased. Evelyn sat quietly, the full weight of her actions pressing down on her. The years of control, manipulation, and fear were meaningless in the face of Mara's courage and the quiet, unshakable truth of the quadruplets she had raised alone. Mara straightened, her voice firm and clear. We survived. We grew. We thrived. And now, you will answer. Not with money. Not with words. Not with excuses. But with truth. And it begins now. The mansion was silent. The chandeliers reflected the sunlight, but all eyes were on Mara and her 4 sons, alive, whole, unbroken, and finally demanding the reckoning they had earned. The morning began like any other in the Hale mansion. The sun gleamed off the polished marble floors, and the staff moved quietly, trying to keep the household in perfect order. But the calm was a lie. The story had leaked. Mara, the quadruplets, Leonard's recklessness, Evelyn's attempt to erase lives with money and control. Within hours, the internet was ablaze. Headlines screamed. Journalists circled the mansion. Social media buzzed with speculation and outrage. Shareholders called, demanding answers. In the boardroom, Evelyn sat rigidly in her chair, a phone pressed to her ear. Her knuckles were white, her face calm, but her mind racing. Yes, I understand, she said in a controlled voice. No, we are handling it. No further comment. Yes, thank you. She hung up. The phone rested heavily on the polished desk. Her empire had survived decades of negotiation, deception, and control, but now, the very foundation trembled. And at the center of it all was Mara. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. The image of the quadruplets, Mara's calm yet powerful gaze, and that one question, the one that had cut through her control, kept coming back to her. She summoned Mara to a private room in the mansion, away from the press, away from Leonard, away from the chaos. Mara entered, composed as ever, her 4 sons standing quietly behind her, silent but observant. Evelyn's face was a mask of control, but her hands betrayed her tension, twisting together nervously. Mara, Evelyn said finally, her voice softer than usual, almost a whisper. I never imagined. Mara stood tall, calm, unshaken. You imagined control, she said simply. You imagined that money could erase us. That fear could silence the truth. That time could bury life. But none of that works anymore, Evelyn. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat dry. I had to protect the family. The empire. The name. I couldn't let the world see what happened. Mara's eyes softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. You protected your reputation. You protected wealth. But you tried to destroy lives. For lives. And for years, you hid behind control, thinking the world would never know. But I lived. And they lived. Evelyn looked away briefly, her chest heaving. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but no words came. Mara had the power now, the truth fully in her hands. I came back to ask questions, Mara said calmly. Not for money. Not for revenge. I don't want what you can buy. I want answers. I want honesty. I want acknowledgement for the lives you tried to erase. Evelyn's hands fell to the desk. The old confidence, the old power, felt useless now. I don't know if I can fix this, she admitted, her voice breaking just slightly. Everything I've built. Mara shook her head gently. You can't erase what you've done. You can't change the past. But you can face it. You can admit it. You can tell Leonard the truth. You can tell the world what really happened. That is the only way forward. The quadruplets stood silently behind Mara, their eyes steady, unwavering. Evelyn glanced at them. They were not impressed. They were not afraid. They were the living proof of what she had tried to hide. And suddenly, the empire, the wealth, the carefully maintained control, all of it, felt meaningless. Evelyn faltered. She had built walls of money, authority, and fear for decades. But now, those walls crumbled in the face of life she could not touch, could not erase, could not buy. Mara's voice cut gently but firmly through the silence. Evelyn, this is your choice. You can keep hiding behind your empire and your name, or you can face what you did, and maybe, just maybe, you can begin to make amends. But it starts with truth. Evelyn looked at Mara, at the strength she radiated, at the 4 boys who carried a life she had tried to destroy. And in that moment, she realized that no amount of money, power, or influence could shield her from the consequences of her choices. The room was silent. The chandeliers glittered above, reflecting the tension in the air. The empire had been shaken to its core. And at its center stood Mara, alive, unbroken, demanding justice, not with wealth, but with truth. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her hands trembling on the desk. Then I will face it, she whispered, almost to herself. I will face the truth. Mara nodded, a faint but satisfied smile on her lips. Good. That is the first step. The rest, we will face together. And for the first time in decades, Evelyn felt powerless. But it was the kind of power that demanded honesty. And for Mara and her quadruplets, it was finally the beginning of justice. The boardroom was packed. Cameras, journalists, shareholders, all waiting. The Hale Empire, built over decades, was facing the storm Mara had unleashed. The leak online had set tongues wagging, questions circling, and rumors flying. But now, Evelyn had a choice. She could hide, protect the empire, silence the truth. She could offer money, influence, or carefully worded statements to keep the world unaware. But every second of silence felt heavier than the weight of the empire itself. Evelyn felt it deep in her chest, the gnawing, relentless guilt that had followed her for years. The memories of Mara, of the unborn children, of the plan she had orchestrated to erase life, it all pressed down on her. If she spoke, the empire might fall. Shareholders might panic. Leonard's reputation, already strained, could crumble. The world might see her not as a titan of business, but as a cruel, controlling woman who tried to destroy a life. If she stayed silent, she would lose herself. Her soul had already been fractured by greed and control, but silence would destroy what remained. The room was quiet. Mara and the quadruplets sat quietly in the front row. Leonard stood beside his mother, watching, unsure, hesitant. The cameras blinked. Every eye in the room waited. Evelyn rose slowly from her chair. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face was calm. She walked to the podium. The murmurs faded. The journalists leaned in. The cameras zoomed. She drew a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. I have lived my life in pursuit of power, wealth, and reputation. I believe control was the most important thing I could have. I believed that the world and my family could be managed with money and influence. But I was wrong. She paused, her eyes briefly meeting Mara's. The woman she had tried to erase stood tall, composed, and unafraid. Evelyn swallowed hard and continued. Years ago, a grave mistake was made. My son, Leonard, and the maid, Mara, were involved in a situation that should have been handled with care, compassion, and honesty. But I feared scandal. I feared loss. I feared disgrace. And I acted out of that fear. Her voice cracked slightly, but she did not stop. I offered money to erase a life. I tried to buy silence. I tried to force Mara to disappear, to make her and her children vanish. For innocent lives, created by my son, were almost erased because of my actions. And for that, I am deeply sorry. The room was silent. Shareholders shifted nervously. Journalists scribbled furiously. Leonard's face went pale. Mara's eyes were steady, unwavering, but she did not speak. Evelyn took another breath. I stand here today, not to protect myself, not to preserve my empire, but to admit the truth. I will no longer hide from it. I will no longer pretend that my fear and greed can erase life. Mara and her children have the right to exist, to be recognized, to live freely, and I have failed them. I admit it. I admit my sin. I admit trying to erase life. And I accept the consequences. There was a long silence. The chandeliers above reflected the tension in the room. Evelyn's confession hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. For the first time in decades, the empire was vulnerable. But Evelyn felt a strange lightness in her chest. A piece of her soul, long buried under fear and ambition, seemed to return. Truth had been spoken. Life had been honored. Mara stood then, softly. "Thank you," she said simply. The quadruplets mirrored her, standing tall and calm, silent but proud. Leonard looked down, conflicted. He had inherited wealth, power, and control, but he had never faced the consequences of his actions like this. Now, he realized that no money could erase the lives Mara had fought to protect. The room remained quiet. The cameras rolled. The world would know. And in that moment, Evelyn understood that truth, even when it threatens an empire, is more valuable than any fortune, any title, any control. She had lost much, but she had regained something that had been missing for far too long: her soul. The Hale empire trembled. By midday, the fallout from Evelyn's confession hit the financial world like a storm. Stocks plummeted. Headlines exploded across newspapers and screens. Social media buzzed with outrage, scandal, and curiosity. Shareholders called frantically, demanding explanations. In the boardroom, Evelyn sat quietly, her hands folded, watching numbers flash red across the screens. The empire she had spent a lifetime building. Every acquisition, every deal, every carefully calculated move was collapsing before her eyes. And yet, inside her chest, something lifted. For the first time in decades, she felt a strange lightness. A release. The weight of lies, fear, and control, the suffocating burden she had carried all these years, was gone. She walked slowly from the boardroom to the private room where Mara and the quadruplets were waiting. Mara watched her calmly, her 4 sons standing close, silent but alert, observing every movement. Leonard lingered behind, unsure, quiet. Evelyn's legs felt heavy, but her steps were purposeful. When she reached the boys, she knelt down, lowering herself to their level. Her hands trembled, her eyes glistened. The stoic, iron-willed matriarch that had ruled the empire for decades now seemed fragile and human. Her voice shook, soft and full of regret. "Forgive me. I mistook power for worth." The quadruplets remained silent, their intelligent eyes fixed on her. But they did not turn away. They waited. And slowly, ever so slowly, Evelyn's tears began to fall. She reached out a hand, hesitating, then lightly touched the shoulder of the eldest boy. Another boy inched closer, then another, until all 4 stood around her. Their presence was calm, unshakable, yet gentle. "I was wrong," Evelyn whispered. "I thought money, control, and fear could protect you from life. I thought erasing you could erase my mistakes. But I see now, nothing I ever built mattered as much as your lives. Nothing I ever earned mattered as much as truth. Nothing I ever controlled mattered as much as love." Mara knelt slightly behind her sons, letting them approach. She did not speak, did not interrupt. She allowed Evelyn this moment, seeing the raw vulnerability of the woman who had once tried to erase her. The eldest boy stepped forward. "Grandmother," he said simply, his voice calm, steady, yet filled with the innocence and wisdom only a child could carry. Evelyn looked at him, tears streaking her face. "Yes, I am your grandmother. And I hope, in time, you can allow me to be more than that. To be someone who protects you, rather than fears you." A quiet calm filled the room. The quadruplets' intelligent eyes softened just slightly, and Evelyn felt, for the first time, that the walls she had built around her heart were finally cracking. Leonard lingered in the corner, silent, watching his mother kneel. For the first time, he saw her not as the ruler of an empire, but as a human being, flawed, regretful, and capable of feeling. The room was quiet, except for Evelyn's soft, shuddering breaths. The weight she had carried, the lies, the fear, the shame, was lifting, replaced by something she had never truly known: release. And in that moment, surrounded by the children she had once tried to erase, Evelyn finally understood the difference between power and worth. Worth was not measured in stocks, in money, or in control. Worth was measured in life, in love, And in truth, for the first time in her life, she cried. The mansion was quiet. The storm of scandal, the collapse of the empire, and the flood of public attention had faded, leaving behind a fragile calm. Mara stood in the doorway of the study, her 4 sons behind her. They were tall, confident, and intelligent beyond their years. They glanced once at Evelyn and Leonard, then focused on their mother. Their eyes carried no fear, no expectation, no desire for what could be bought. Only curiosity, only life. Mara turned slightly, her gaze meeting Evelyn's. Calm, measured, and unyielding, she spoke softly. We will return to our life now. On our terms. We do not need your money. We do not need your approval. But we will leave the door open, for respect, for honesty, for what remains between us. Evelyn watched the 4 boys, and in that moment, she understood. They were not property. They were not extensions of her wealth or her control. They were living proof of courage, resilience, and life that could not be silenced. One by one, the quadruplets walked past her, keeping their distance, but leaving her a quiet space to observe, to reflect. Evelyn's chest felt lighter, her shoulders looser. For the first time in decades, she breathed without the crushing weight of control and fear. Leonard remained silent, watching his children, his sons, walk away. He had offered money, schools, and trust funds, but none of it mattered. They were not his to command. They were Mara's. They were life itself. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice low, full of realization. I built empires. I built wealth. I built walls. But I see now that legacy is not in buildings, or stocks, or titles. It is in the lives you choose not to destroy. Mara nodded slightly, satisfied, then led her sons down the marble hallway. They paused once, turning briefly to glance at Evelyn and Leonard, then continued onward, stepping into the sunlight streaming through the open gates. Evelyn's eyes followed them, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She whispered to herself, more for her own heart than for anyone else. Some children are not born by accident. They are born to expose the truth. The mansion, grand and cold, felt smaller now. The empire, though powerful, was empty without life, without honesty, without love. But Evelyn did not feel despair. She felt the beginning of redemption, a chance to rebuild, not with control, but with conscience. Mara, her sons, and the life they had fought to preserve disappeared down the driveway, leaving behind only the light of truth and the quiet knowledge that some legacies are far greater than wealth. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep, steadying breath. And for the first time in years, she felt at peace. The story of power, greed, fear, and attempted erasure had ended. Not in wealth, not in influence, not in control, but in life, truth, and the courage to survive.